Susan, a middle-aged homeowner in Silver Oaks, lounged in her front yard, soaking up the sun. Her peaceful afternoon was interrupted when she spotted Darius, a black man she didn't recognize, working in her wealthy neighbor's garden. Immediately, suspicion clouded her judgment. She watched him intently, her eyes narrowing as he moved about the property. Unable to shake her unease, Susan retreated into her house. Her heart raced as she picked up the phone, dialing the police with trembling fingers. In a hushed voice, she reported a suspicious individual in the neighborhood. The urgency in her tone betrayed her fear, though she tried to maintain composure. Meanwhile, Darius continued his work, oblivious to the drama unfolding. When the police arrived, they approached him cautiously. Darius, surprised by their presence, remained calm and polite. He answered their questions with patience, his demeanor a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere. As the officers questioned Darius, curious neighbors began to gather. The scene became increasingly surreal. Darius, composed and articulate, explained his presence without revealing his true identity. The officers, initially skeptical, found themselves puzzled by his eloquence and confidence. Susan watched from her window, a mix of vindication and uncertainty washing over her. She hadn't expected such a calm response from the man she'd reported. As the interaction between Darius and the police continued, she began to question her hasty judgment. The police, finding no cause for alarm, eventually left. Darius resumed his work, leaving the onlookers to disperse and discuss what they'd witnessed. Susan, however, remained unsettled. She had set something in motion that she couldn't take back, and the consequences were yet to unfold. After the police departed, Darius decided to address the situation directly. He approached Susan's house and introduced himself as a temporary gardener. Despite his friendly demeanor, Susan remained wary. Her eyes darted nervously as she listened to his explanation, her body language betraying her lingering suspicion. Later that week, Susan met with her friends at their regular cafe hangout. The group, mostly longtime residents of Silver Oaks, eagerly listened as Susan recounted the incident. Many nodded in agreement as she expressed her concerns about neighborhood safety and the importance of vigilance. "We have to protect our community," one friend asserted, her coffee forgotten as she leaned in. "You did the right thing, Susan." However, not everyone shared this view. Lisa, usually quiet during these gatherings, spoke up. "Don't you think you might have overreacted?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "What if he really was just doing his job?" A tense silence fell over the group. Susan felt a flicker of doubt, but quickly pushed it aside. "Better safe than sorry," she replied, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. The conversation moved on, but the atmosphere had shifted. Susan found herself replaying the incident in her mind, questioning her actions. She noticed Lisa's thoughtful expression and wondered if her friend's words held more truth than she wanted to admit. As they left the cafe, the usual camaraderie felt strained. Susan's friends offered reassuring words, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The incident with Darius had exposed a divide in their tight-knit group, one that couldn't be easily dismissed. Walking home, Susan grappled with conflicting emotions. She had always prided herself on being a good neighbor, but now she wondered if her actions had truly served her community. The seed of doubt planted by Lisa's words began to take root, challenging Susan's long-held beliefs about safety and belonging in Silver Oaks. Weeks after the incident, Darius revealed his true identity as a millionaire entrepreneur. He organized a community meeting to discuss his plans for neighborhood revitalization, focusing on supporting minority-owned small businesses. The revelation sent shockwaves through Silver Oaks, and curiosity drew a large crowd to the local community center. Darius stood at the front of the room, his enthusiasm palpable as he outlined his vision. "This project isn't just about economic growth," he explained, his voice carrying to the back of the packed room. "It's about creating opportunities and fostering a sense of belonging for everyone in our community." As he spoke, a group of young residents, including a teenager named Jamal, listened intently. Their eyes lit up as Darius described potential internships and mentorship programs. Recognizing their interest, Darius approached them after his presentation. How would you like to be part of this project? He asked Jamal and his friends. The teenagers exchanged excited glances, nodding eagerly. Darius smiled, seeing their potential. Great. We'll start with some basic training, and then you'll help us reach out to the community. From the back of the room, Susan observed the interaction. She watched as Darius connected effortlessly with the young group, his genuine interest in their ideas evident. The scene before her contrasted sharply with the suspicions she had harbored just weeks ago. As the meeting dispersed, Susan lingered, torn between approaching Darius and slipping away unnoticed. She felt a mix of shame and curiosity, wondering how she could have misjudged him so severely. The energy and positivity he brought to the room were undeniable, and she found herself drawn to the possibility of change he represented. Darius, catching sight of Susan, gave her a friendly nod. This simple gesture, free of resentment, made Susan realize the opportunity before her. She could choose to remain trapped by her preconceptions or take a step toward understanding and growth. As she watched Darius continue to engage with community members, Susan made a silent commitment to open herself to this new chapter in Silver Oaks. Continue. Topic 4. Motivated by her growing unease with her past actions, Susan joined a local support group focused on addressing prejudice and promoting inclusion within the community. The group met weekly in a small, unassuming room at the community center, its members a diverse mix of Silver Oaks residents. During these meetings, Susan found herself confronted with stories of discrimination that made her uncomfortable. She listened as her neighbors recounted experiences of being followed in stores, pulled over without cause, or treated with suspicion in their own neighborhood. Each story chipped away at her previous worldview, forcing her to confront the reality of systemic bias. In one particularly intense session, Susan mustered the courage to share her own experience with Darius. Her voice trembled as she recounted her actions and the subsequent revelation of his true identity. I thought I was protecting my community, she admitted, her eyes downcast. But now I see I was part of the problem. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Susan looked up, bracing herself for judgment. Instead, she was met with a mix of understanding nods and contemplative expressions. Some group members shared similar stories of their own biases, while others offered words of encouragement for her willingness to change. However, not everyone was as forgiving. A few participants exchanged skeptical glances, their body language suggesting they weren't entirely convinced by Susan's apparent change of heart. One member, a young woman named Tanya, spoke up. It's great that you're here, she said, her tone measured. But how do we know you're truly committed to change? Susan felt a flush of shame, but recognized the validity of the question. I can't change overnight, she responded honestly. But I'm here to listen, learn, and do better. I want to be part of the solution. As the meeting concluded, Susan felt drained but oddly energized. The group had challenged her in ways she hadn't expected, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and her community. She realized that true change would require more than just attending meetings. It would demand action. With this newfound determination, Susan approached Darius after the next community meeting. I want to help with your project, she said, her voice firm despite her nervousness. I have organizational skills that could be useful. Please, let me be part of this change. Susan's offer to help caught Darius off guard, but he recognized the sincerity in her voice. All right, he nodded. Let's start planning a community event together. As they began collaborating, Susan's initial hesitation gave way to determination. She was eager to prove her commitment to change, both to herself and to the community. Their first task was to scout locations for the event. As they visited potential venues, Susan found herself opening up to Darius about her past prejudices and her journey towards self-awareness. Darius listened without judgment, offering insights from his own experiences. During one of these site visits, they encountered a group of longtime Silver Oaks residents. The atmosphere quickly became tense as the residents expressed their concerns about the proposed changes to the neighborhood. We don't need outsiders telling us how to run our community, one man said, his voice laced with suspicion. Susan felt a familiar unease creep over her, recognizing her old mindset in their words. Darius remained calm, addressing their concerns with patience. He turned to Susan, silently encouraging her to speak up. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "I used to think like you," she admitted. "But I've learned that change doesn't have to be threatening. It can make our community stronger." Her words were met with skepticism, but a few residents seemed to consider her perspective. As they left the meeting, Darius pulled Susan aside. "You did well," he said, "but this is just the beginning. Are you ready to face more resistance?" Susan nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I am. But Darius, I'm scared. What if I can't overcome my own biases? What if I let you down?" Darius's expression softened. "Change isn't easy, Susan. It's okay to be afraid. The important thing is that you're trying. Keep confronting those fears. Keep questioning your assumptions. That's how we grow." As they continued planning, Susan found herself grappling with internal conflicts. Each interaction challenged her to confront her ingrained beliefs and fears. She realized that true change required more than just good intentions. It demanded constant self-reflection and the courage to speak up, even when it was uncomfortable. The upcoming event loomed large in Susan's mind. She knew it would be a test, not just for the community, but for herself. As she worked alongside Darius, she silently vowed to keep pushing forward, no matter how difficult the journey might become. Continue. Topic 6. As the event drew nearer, Susan threw herself into the organization process. She arranged meetings with various community members, determined to ensure all voices were heard. These gatherings, however, often became heated as the divide between supporters and opponents of the project became more apparent. During one particularly tense meeting, Susan found herself mediating between two factions. "We need to consider everyone's perspective," she urged, her voice steady despite the rising tension in the room. "This project is about bringing us together, not driving us apart." Her words seemed to have little effect as arguments continued to erupt. Susan felt overwhelmed, questioning whether she was truly up to the task. But each time she faltered, she reminded herself of the journey she had undertaken and the importance of persevering. As Susan left the meeting, exhausted but determined, she received a shocking piece of news. Lisa, her longtime friend and the one who had initially questioned her actions towards Darius, was now leading a movement against the community fair. Susan couldn't believe it. Seeking answers, Susan confronted Lisa at her home. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice a mix of confusion and hurt. Lisa's response was firm. "This project is moving too fast. It's going to change the character of our neighborhood. We need to protect what we have." Susan recognized the fear in Lisa's words, the same fear she had once harbored. "But Lisa, change doesn't have to be a threat. It can make us stronger, more inclusive." Their conversation ended in a stalemate, with both women realizing the depth of the rift between them. As Susan walked home, she felt the weight of her position more than ever. She was caught between old friendships and new convictions, between the comfort of the familiar and the promise of progress. The situation came to a head at the next Homeowners Association meeting. Susan found herself at the center of attention as both sides looked to her for support. She took a deep breath, knowing that her next words could significantly impact the future of the project and her relationships in the community. "I understand the concerns about change," Susan began, her voice shaky but gaining strength. "I had those same fears, but I've learned that growth often requires stepping out of our comfort zones. This project isn't about erasing our community's identity. It's about enriching it." As murmurs filled the room, Susan realized she had reached a pivotal moment. Her journey from prejudice to advocacy had led her here, and there was no turning back. Whatever the outcome, she knew she had to stand firm in her newfound beliefs, even if it meant losing old friends along the way. Continue. Topic 7. The day of the community fair arrived, bringing with it a mix of excitement and apprehension. Susan arrived early, her stomach in knots as she oversaw the final preparations. Darius approached her, sensing her nervousness. "You've done an amazing job, Susan," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I want you to take the lead today. Show everyone how far you've come." Susan's eyes widened in surprise. Are you sure? What if I mess up? Darius smiled. You won't. Trust yourself. As the fair began, people started trickling in. Susan watched anxiously as different groups mingled, some enthusiastically, others more hesitantly. She moved through the crowd, encouraging interactions and addressing concerns. The atmosphere was mostly positive, with residents engaging with local businesses and enjoying the festivities. However, Susan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her instincts proved right when she noticed a group of people huddled near the entrance, their expressions hostile. As she approached, she recognized them as part of Lisa's opposition group. They were handing out flyers criticizing the project and warning about the dangers of change. Susan felt a surge of anger and disappointment, but she forced herself to remain calm. I see you have concerns, she said, addressing the group. Why don't you come in and see what this is really about? You might be surprised. Some ignored her, continuing to distribute flyers. Others, however, hesitated, seeming to consider her words. A few even decided to enter the fair, curiosity overcoming their skepticism. Just as Susan thought she had the situation under control, she heard a commotion near the main stage. Racing over, she found Darius in a heated argument with a group of protesters who had managed to slip in. They were accusing him of trying to take over the neighborhood. Without hesitation, Susan stepped between Darius and the protesters. This man is trying to invest in our community, she said firmly. He's offering opportunities that can benefit all of us. Isn't that what we all want for Silver Oaks? Her words seemed to resonate with some of the onlookers. The tension in the air began to dissipate as more people voiced their support for the project. As the situation calmed, Susan and Darius exchanged a look of relief and solidarity. They had weathered the storm together, and in doing so, had shown the community the power of unity in the face of adversity. The fair continued, with the earlier disruption serving as a catalyst for more open discussions among attendees. Susan realized that change wasn't just about grand gestures, but also about these small moments of connection and understanding. Continue. Topic 8. As the fair progressed, Darius pulled Susan aside. There's something I need to tell you, he said, his expression serious. This event isn't just about community building. It's a test to see if Silver Oaks is ready for bigger changes. Susan's eyes widened. What do you mean? Darius explained that his company was considering a major investment in the area, but they needed to ensure the community was open to growth and diversity. The fair was a litmus test for future projects. This revelation added a new layer of pressure for Susan. She realized that her efforts weren't just about changing minds. They could potentially shape the future of Silver Oaks. As they walked through the fair, Susan noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The initial resistance was giving way to curiosity and engagement. She overheard conversations between longtime residents and minority business owners, discussing potential collaborations and sharing personal stories. One exchange particularly caught her attention. An elderly resident, who had earlier expressed skepticism, was now intently listening to a young entrepreneur's passionate pitch about her startup. The genuine interest in the older woman's eyes signaled a small but significant change. Susan approached various groups, encouraging these interactions. She found that people were more receptive when they could put faces and stories to the abstract concept of change they had been resisting. As the afternoon wore on, Darius announced that one of the young participants, Jamal, would give a speech. Susan held her breath, hoping this would be a turning point. Jamal took the stage, visibly nervous but determined. I've lived in Silver Oaks my whole life, he began, his voice gaining strength. But until now, I never felt like I truly belonged. This project isn't just about business opportunities. It's about creating a community where everyone feels at home. His words resonated through the crowd. Susan saw nods of agreement and thoughtful expressions, even among those who had been opposed to the project. She realized that Jamal's personal story had done more to change hearts and minds than any amount of planning or persuasion could have achieved. As Jamal finished his speech to a round of applause, Susan felt a surge of hope. The fair hadn't erased all opposition, but it had started conversations and challenged preconceptions. She looked at Darius, who gave her a subtle nod of approval. The event was more than just a success. It was a promising first step toward a more inclusive Silver Oaks. Susan knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt confident that real change was possible. Continue. Topic 9. In the days following the fair, Susan and Darius found themselves at the center of community attention. Many residents approached them with praise and newfound enthusiasm for the project. The event had sparked a sense of unity that was previously absent in Silver Oaks. "I never thought I'd say this," one longtime resident told Susan, "but I'm actually excited about these changes. It feels like our neighborhood is coming alive." Susan basked in the positive feedback, feeling a sense of accomplishment. However, she knew better than to let her guard down completely. There were still pockets of resistance, and she remained vigilant. Her caution proved warranted when she received an alarming phone call from a sympathetic member of the Homeowners Association. Lisa, it seemed, wasn't ready to concede defeat. She was planning to take legal action against Darius, aiming to discredit both him and his project. "She's gathered a group of residents who claim Darius misrepresented his intentions," the caller explained. "They're preparing to file a lawsuit to stop any further development." Susan felt a mix of anger and disappointment. She had hoped that the success of the fair would have changed Lisa's mind. Now, she realized that the battle for Silver Oak's future was far from over. Conflicted, Susan debated her next move. Lisa had been her friend for years, and part of her wanted to attempt one last reconciliation. However, she also felt a strong urge to protect Darius and the positive changes he represented. After a sleepless night, Susan made her decision. She would confront Lisa directly one final time, but this time, she wouldn't be seeking middle ground. She would stand firmly in defense of Darius and his vision for the community. The next morning, Susan marched to Lisa's house, her resolve strengthening with each step. When Lisa answered the door, her expression hardened at the sight of Susan. "I know what you're planning," Susan said, cutting straight to the chase. "And I'm here to tell you it's wrong. Darius has done nothing but try to improve our community. If you go through with this lawsuit, you'll be hurting all of us, not just him." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "You've changed, Susan. Can't you see he's manipulating all of us? This isn't the Silver Oaks we know and love." "No, it's better," Susan countered. "It's a Silver Oaks that's growing, that's welcoming to everyone. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here anymore." The words hung heavy between them, marking the end of their friendship and the beginning of a new chapter for Susan. As she walked away from Lisa's house, Susan felt a mix of sadness and determination. She knew the coming days would be challenging, but she was ready to stand up for what she now believed in, regardless of the personal cost. Continue. Topic 10. The tension in Silver Oaks reached its peak as Lisa's group called for a press conference to air their grievances against Darius and his project. The local media, sensing a story, descended upon the community center where the event was to be held. Susan arrived early, her heart racing as she saw the gathering crowd. She spotted Darius in deep conversation with his legal team, his usually calm demeanor showing signs of stress. When he saw Susan, he gave her a nod of acknowledgement. As the conference began, Lisa took the podium, her voice steady as she laid out her accusations. "We have evidence that Mr. Darius has misrepresented his intentions," she declared. "His so-called community project is nothing more than a front for a large-scale commercial development that will destroy the character of Silver Oaks." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Susan watched as confusion and doubt spread across the faces of many residents who had begun to embrace the changes. She felt a surge of anger at Lisa's tactics. Just as the situation seemed to be spiraling out of control, Darius stepped forward. "I believe I can address these concerns," he said calmly. He produced a folder and began distributing documents to the press and community leaders present. "These are the full plans for the project, including my personal background and the company's financial statements," Darius explained. "As you can see, everything has been transparent from the beginning. Our goal is to enhance the community, not exploit it." The room fell silent as people pored over the documents. Susan watched Lisa's face pale as she realized her accusations were being systematically dismantled. Sensing the shift in the room, Susan decided to speak up. "I was once like many of you," she said, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger. "I was suspicious of change and quick to judge, but I've seen firsthand the positive impact this project can have. We have a chance to make Silver Oaks a model of inclusive community development." Her words seemed to resonate with many in the audience. Several community members stood up to voice their support for Darius and the project. Lisa, now isolated, found herself confronted by her own friends and neighbors. "How could you do this, Lisa?" one woman asked. "You're tearing our community apart based on fear and misinformation." As the tide turned against her, Lisa fled the room, leaving her supporters to face the consequences of their actions. The press conference had turned into a powerful demonstration of community solidarity. In the aftermath, Darius was approached by numerous residents offering apologies and support. Susan watched with a mix of relief and pride as people came together, the divisiveness of the past weeks giving way to a renewed sense of unity. As the crowd dispersed, Darius approached Susan. "Thank you," he said simply. "Your journey has inspired more people than you know." Susan smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. She knew that Silver Oaks still had challenges ahead, but for the first time, she was truly excited about its future. A future she had helped shape through her own transformation and courage to stand up for what was right. Palpable. Some employees, fearing for their jobs and reputations, began distancing themselves from the diversity program they had once enthusiastically supported. Ethan organized a press conference to address the allegations directly. Standing before a sea of cameras and microphones, he took a deep breath before speaking. "We acknowledge the truth in these reports," he began, his voice steady. "This dealership, like many institutions, has a history marred by discrimination. We cannot change that past, but we can learn from it and work tirelessly to create a better future." He went on to outline specific steps they were taking to make amends, including establishing a fund for those who had been unfairly treated in the past and implementing even more robust anti-discrimination policies. As the press conference concluded, Ethan noticed Thomas standing at the back of the room, looking devastated. The personal toll of confronting his past actions was evident on his face. Later that day, Thomas knocked on Ethan's office door. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I need to resign." Ethan faced a difficult decision. Thomas had been instrumental in the dealership's transformation, but his past actions were now threatening to undermine everything they had worked for. The way Ethan handled this situation would test the true depth of their commitment to growth, forgiveness, and accountability. Ethan listened to Thomas's words, recognizing the profound crisis of conscience the man was experiencing. After a moment of contemplation, he spoke. "Thomas, your past actions were wrong, and we can't ignore that. But your journey of change is exactly what our initiative represents. Stepping down now would be the easy way out. The harder, more meaningful path is to face this head-on and use your experience to drive real change." Thomas looked up, a mix of surprise and hesitation in his eyes. "But how can anyone trust me now? How can I lead others when I've made such terrible mistakes?" Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady. "By being honest about your past and showing others that change is possible. Your story, painful as it is, could be powerful in helping others confront their own biases." After a long discussion, Thomas agreed to stay, but both men knew that the road ahead would be challenging. They decided to hold a company-wide meeting to address the situation transparently. At the meeting, Thomas stood before his colleagues, his voice shaking as he began to speak. "I've been part of the problem we're trying to solve. I can't change my past actions, but I can own up to them and commit to doing better." His raw honesty struck a chord with many employees. Some shared their own experiences of witnessing or participating in discrimination, creating a powerful moment of collective reckoning. Ethan then outlined a comprehensive plan to address the dealership's history and reinforce their commitment to change. This included creating a public archive documenting past discriminatory practices and the steps taken to address them, establishing an independent review board to oversee hiring, promotion, and customer service practices, expanding their community outreach programs, particularly in underserved areas, implementing a more robust whistleblower policy to encourage reporting of any discriminatory behavior. The media response to these actions was mixed, but largely positive. Many praised the dealership's transparency and concrete steps towards accountability. In the following months, Thomas became a powerful advocate for change, sharing his story at industry conferences and in training sessions. His journey from perpetrator to champion of inclusivity resonated deeply with many who were grappling with their own biases. A year after the crisis, the dealership hosted an anniversary event to reflect on their progress. The showroom was packed with employees, customers, and community members. Ethan took the stage, looking out at the diverse faces before him. "A year ago, we were forced to confront some hard truths," he began. "Today, we stand here not as a perfect organization, but as one committed to continuous growth and accountability." He invited Thomas to join him on stage. As Thomas stepped up, the room erupted in applause, a testament to the power of genuine transformation. Sarah, now the dealership's diversity and inclusion officer, presented data showing significant improvements in hiring practices, customer satisfaction across all demographics, and community engagement. As the event concluded, a young salesperson approached Ethan. "When I started here, I didn't think much about diversity," she said. "Now, it's changed how I see the world. Thank you for not giving up on us." Ethan smiled, realizing that the genuine change in people's hearts and minds, was the true measure of their success. The journey had been difficult, filled with unexpected challenges and painful reckonings. But as he looked around at the transformed dealership and the people within it, he knew that they had created something truly meaningful, a model for change that could inspire others far beyond the walls of their showroom.